Confident, confident, confident. I can be confident, 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 confident. I can be confident at work.
Hello and welcome to episode 113 of the Confident at Work podcast. I'm your host and your confidence coach, Anna Manning. And today I'm going to talk to you about a struggle that a lot of the people who I coach and train come up against. So typically when people work with me, they're coming because they want to build their professional confidence. They want to feel more confident at work. And the way that I help them to do that is to think about how they're managing themselves and then help them to change it. So they typically go from managing themselves in a way which is harsh, critical, doubting, has unachievable standards, and typically will focus on their negatives and not really notice their positives. And we're aiming for an internal manager which is more respectful, more encouraging, more supportive, who sets realistic standards, who can cope if there's a mistake or a failure, and who notices the positives as well as seeing the negatives. The kind of manager that we all want in the external world, we are trying to install in my client's brain. And I am trying to install in your brain via this podcast. But for many of my clients, there feels like there's a catch because they tell me, well, the way I've succeeded so far is to drive myself like a slave, be very critical, very doubting, very demanding, beat myself up if I've made a mistake, notice all the negatives and never focus on the positives. I don't give myself praise. And that's how I've been successful. That's how I've got to where I've got to. That's how I achieve. So there's the catch. That might have driven you so far. It also may have achieved you a lot of success. But what it won't have done is allowed you to build and maintain your professional confidence at the same time, because how could your confidence be maintained in an environment that was constantly demanding, constantly driving, doubting, critical, didn't tolerate any mistakes, and never saw the positives? Confidence can't really exist in that environment. So what do my clients do? They had a recipe for success, and that recipe was drive themselves with doubt, with criticism, with perfectionism, with always noticing the negatives. And here I am saying, well, how do you want to be managed? How do you need to be managed in order to feel confident? And they're telling me I need to be supported, I need to be encouraged, I need to be set realistic standards. I need someone to notice the things that I do well as the things that go wrong. I need some praise. I need some validation. And I'm saying, okay, well, we can't alter the outside world to make sure you get that from everybody else, but we can make sure that you get it from you. We can make sure that your internal manager respects you, supports you, sets you realistic standards, and notices the things that you do well. That's how you grow your professional confidence. And they say, but if I treat myself properly, if I speak to myself with respect, if I trust my abilities, if I set myself realistic standards, if I tolerate a mistake and say, you can learn from it and move on, and if I notice the things that I've done well instead of just focusing on the negatives, maybe I won't be able to achieve anymore. Maybe I won't be able to succeed anymore. Maybe I'll have no motivation. Maybe I'll never do any work. And it's always an interesting conundrum for a client. Now, I'm not in the habit of telling people what to do. So that's one that I let them work through. But I wanted to bring this to the podcast in case it's a fear that's come up in your mind. Were you to start managing yourself differently, respectfully, setting yourself appropriate standards, noticing when you did things well? Let's say you did that and it helped to build your professional confidence. But what if everything else fell apart? What if you no longer care whether your work is good or bad, or you just stop showing up? You don't try, you haven't got any ambition. Maybe that's a concern that you would have too. Certainly a concern that many, or maybe even most of my clients go through at some point. It's not like they even actively chose to manage themselves like a tyrant. They've just been doing it for ages and it's what's been working. Working in air quotes. Maybe it's worked to the tune that they are successful. They have got promotions. They've done well. They've produced good work. They've made good relationships. Have they been driven to success by a tyrant? What would it have been like for them had they not been driven by a tyrant internal boss? It's interesting to think about it. So let's say I'm used to fueling my success with criticism. I criticize myself in my head. I tell myself I'm an idiot. I tell myself I need to do better. I tell myself it wasn't good enough. And that's just the routine loop that plays in my head all the time. Part of a low confidence cycle, but hell, it's worked for me so far. It's got me this far and I'm successful. Why would I want to change it? Well, it could have been fueling your success, although I'm not sure that it has been, but let's just say that it has. It's also been fueling low confidence. So, your choice. You can keep criticizing yourself. You can have a manager inside your head who's a complete tyrant, but the price you may have to pay is that your professional confidence is not going to be what it could be. Because whose confidence would be what it could be if their boss was a tyrant and gave them a really hard time all the time? They're just not going to feel as confident as they could do, even if they're really competent. And neither can you. So if you think criticism has been fueling your success, self-criticism, I want you to notice how you speak to other people. If you're a manager or a leader of people, how do you speak to them in a way that you think fuels their success? Is it by criticizing them? Or is it something else? I'm guessing if you're listening to this podcast that it's something else. And also think of it this way. What kind of boss do you need to be supported by in order to be at your best, in order to be at your most confident? I'm yet to meet anybody who tells me it's a boss who criticizes them. And yet, when I do work with people on their inner critic and on changing this internal boss so that they can feel more confident, I always come up against this issue. If I'm not criticizing myself anymore, I won't be able to get anything done. I won't succeed. I need to be criticized. Now, most people don't go as far as saying that because it feels really uncomfortable, but that's where that naturally goes, right? What you're actually saying is, I need to be criticized in order to do good work. I need to be criticized in order to be motivated. I need to be criticized in order to succeed. And if that feels jarring to you, then maybe just notice that. Do you need to be criticized in order to succeed? Do you need to be criticized in order to be motivated? If you think that the answer is no, and you would never knowingly choose a boss who criticized you in order to help you to succeed and to achieve, why are you choosing that boss for yourself? Your internal boss is the closest one you're ever going to have. The next area that I see tripping people up is around productivity. And people thinking they have to kind of be punishing and set unrealistic standards in order to be productive. In the executive function coaching work that I do, I always notice that someone's natural tendency seems to be completely unrealistic about what's actually achievable in order to help them with their productivity. And I sit back for a couple of weeks and I let them do it. And then I help them to notice what actually happens when they put themselves under so much pressure and it's actually unachievable. And to a man and a woman, every time, what they notice is that they get less done. They are less productive when they put themselves under undue and unrealistic pressure. And it stands to reason. Have you ever, you might have been in this situation, but have you ever seen people who are on a team of a tyrant who has completely unrelenting and unrealistic standards? They are stressed. And you know what stressed people aren't very? Productive. They can't work and act with a clear head. It's harder to organize their mind. It's harder to plan. It's harder to prioritize and then execute tasks clearly and calmly and confidently. So many of us think, do you know what, in order to be productive, I need to set these completely unrealistic standards and punish myself. I've done a lot of work with people who want to be more productive. And so far, we've never yet found that that's the answer. The other thing I see tripping people up is if I don't have this all-encompassing self-doubt running through my head all the time, I won't be safe in my work Maybe I'll make rogue decisions that are way outside of my experience or my expertise. I've had clients who work in healthcare that say maybe I won't even be safe as a practitioner if I don't have all this self doubt. And again, with my clients, I've never really found that to be true. We found underneath all of that self doubt that actually, when they lay back and they trust in their experience and their expertise, they make decisions confidently that are within the level of their expertise. And they ask someone if it's not, because that isn't a sign of weakness or a problem. They're just at the level of their expertise and they want to ask or they want to confirm. They don't go off doing dangerous things. There isn't that arrogance and that overconfidence when there's trust. There's a fear that there might be. But when we explore it, I never really see that with my clients. Now, with some people, maybe we see levels of arrogance and overconfidence in our politics and in civil society that we think, wow, what is it that makes you think that you can be president? Like, this is mind boggling to me. And yet, there they are. And there's this worry often for my clients, and maybe for you, that if you actually manage to let go of some of that self doubt and lean back into that trust in who you are and what you can do and your expertise and your experience, that somehow you're going to become dangerous. You're going to become like that guy who really thinks that he can be president and do a good job at it. You ain't going to become him. You're so far away from that. It's untrue. That it is a worry. And it is a doubt that if we drop the doubt, we're suddenly going to become this overconfident, arrogant, egotistical, I don't know what, that makes dangerous decisions and done dangerous things. Well, so far with my clients, I've never seen it happen. The next area that I see is I have to pile on the pressure in order to help me perform. So let's say I'm going to do a presentation. I might be thinking, I have to put the pressure on. I've got to get this right. I've got to do this right. This has to be perfect. This has got to be really good. And like my internal managers really like ramped up with all of that. They're like, you're going to be boring. You're not even charismatic. Like, who even cares about what you have to say? This has to be perfect. You know that track that can play in your mind before something like a presentation. The tyrannical manager strikes again. And many people tell me, do you know, I'm not sure if I would do a good job if I didn't have that kind of tyrannical boss reminding me that I could be rubbish and I could do rubbish. I have to pile the pressure on myself. Otherwise, maybe I really would be rubbish. Maybe I wouldn't care. Maybe I wouldn't show up. Maybe I wouldn't do any prep. That is a concern for people, especially when they find out that one of the main culprits for how awful they feel when they're about to do a presentation is the stuff which is going through their mind. The criticism, the doubt, the standards, the fact that they know that they've chewed themselves out the last 3 times they did it. When they realize that maybe they've got to drop all that if they're going to become a confident presenter, they've got to stop criticizing themselves. Maybe they've got to stop doubting themselves so much. Maybe they've got to ease up on the standards at least while they're practicing. And maybe they won't be able to criticize their performance in their head for 2 hours afterwards. But what if they drop all that? Isn't the danger that they just won't perform? I've never seen it. But what I have seen is people increasing their confidence when they decrease the pressure. I've seen people performing better without the pressure than with it, but they're still afraid to drop that pressure in case it would mean they just did it rubbish. And then you ask them, well, how would you need to be supported in order to really perform best at this presentation? Would you need a team that reminded you how rubbish you were going to be and what high stakes there were, and the fact that you got it wrong the last 3 times and you weren't as articulate as you should be, and it's really going to have a bad impact on your reputation if you get it wrong again? I've yet to have anybody tell me that that's the kind of support that they need in order to help them feel confident. And yet, they're so afraid of letting that go in case it means that they don't perform. Letting go of that is the very thing that helps them perform without piling on the pressure. And the last one that I notice all the time is about fear of letting go of focusing on the negatives. So many of my clients will say, I tend to focus on the negatives and I tend to kind of gloss over or not really notice the positives as much. That's fairly typical. And it's fairly common and it's part of a low confidence cycle in general. So I'm expecting my clients to tell me that this is something that they can identify with. Frequently hear people express the fear. What if I did start noticing the positives as well as the negatives? If I didn't have a laser sharp focus on the negatives, maybe that would create problems for me. Maybe I would get complacent. Maybe I wouldn't be motivated to do good work. And I always think, interesting. Does the fact that your boss gives you fair feedback, i.e., notices the things you do well as the things that don't go so well, does that make you complacent and unmotivated? I'm yet to have anybody tell me that they want a boss who always laser focuses on their negatives and never notices their positives. I am yet to find anybody who would tell me that. And yet, for many of my clients, and maybe even for you, there is this fear that if they are actually able to let go of the shore on that one and float in the sea of noticing their positives as well as the things that go wrong, they'd become complacent and unmotivated. So there are the things that I've noticed. Fear that the fuel that was driving their success, criticism, once removed, would create problems. Fear that the kind of punishing regime that was driving their productivity, if that changed to something more realistic and supportive, would mean that they were no longer productive. Fear that without all the self-doubt, they wouldn't actually be safe and they would go way beyond the bounds of their expertise, causing havoc for themselves, their organizations, and their clients. Fear that if they didn't pile on all the extra pressure when they're about to perform, that they would just do a rubbish job or not even prepare for it in the first place. Fear that if they were able to be more balanced and let go of the need to always see the negatives and never notice the positives, that they would become complacent and not be motivated to do any good work. All of those fears are fears that my clients have talked to me about many, many times. And there may even be fears that you have. When we're used to doing things in a certain way, we don't question them. But when we do start to question them, naturally fears arise. Fear that we become lazy, complacent, arrogant, unmotivated, unproductive. Most of us have unconsciously built our ways of doing things. There is some intention behind it that we're trying to satisfy. Like, we want to be successful, we want to be productive, we want to do good work, we want to do well. We may even have good intention. Sometimes that internal boss doesn't, but sometimes it does. But all of those strategies that we've built up for how to fuel our success, how to motivate ourselves, how to ensure that we're productive, how to ensure that we're safe, how to ensure that we perform, how to ensure that we don't become complacent, are killing our confidence. And actually, killing our souls a little bit. And why wouldn't they be? Imagine you had a boss that was like, the way I motivate my people and the way I ensure that they're productive and they perform well and they don't become complacent is I criticize them, I doubt them, I subject them to extremely high standards, I never tolerate them making a mistake, and I always point out their negatives and I don't give them any good feedback. You'd think that person was a total psycho. You'd be like, Jesus, swerve that, not working for them in a million years. And yet, here my clients are in all good intention telling me that if they let go of those ways of managing themselves, then maybe bad things will happen. Well, I'm delighted to report that so far I've never seen bad things happen from good management. External and internal. When my clients actually start managing themselves in the way that they want to be managed, respectful, supportive, encouraging, with realistic standards, fair feedback that notices the things that they do well and praises them for it. When they've got that kind of boss on the inside, I have never seen that have a negative result. I've seen them feel more confident. I've seen them become more productive. I've seen them be safe and effective in their practice. I've seen them perform, even in situations which are outside of their comfort zone. I have seen them still be diligent and care about the work that they do and the people around them. And I've seen them be motivated. If you can believe it, maybe even more motivated than they were before. That's all I have for you this week, unless you want to come and coach with me directly. There are two ways of doing it now. First way is that the members club is currently open. So if you're a professional woman and you want to think about how you manage yourself and be supported to feel more confident at work, then come and join us inside the members club. You can join for a quarter or you can join for a year, and you'll be welcomed into live trainings, live coaching, and ad hoc support, which is going to help you to feel your most confident and feel your best at work. If you want to coach with me privately, there is a link in the show notes. Click through to that, book some time in my diary, tell me what your challenges are, and I'll help you think about how we solve them. I'll see you in next week's episode. Bye.
Confidence, confidence, confident. I can be confident. Confidence, confidence, confident. I can be confident at work.